And we sped up the video again at this point, and we're using the move brush to just adjust the shape of the horn, or the flow of the horn, getting a bit of an S curve going in that. And I'm using the transpose mask here and bone posing. I'm using the bone posing where you hold down Alt and then click and drag in that last circle, and it'll bend using that last circle on that line as the center point of the bend. I'm looking for kind of a nice sweeping curve right now. This last little touch on the horns is just trying to find a really appealing shape. I'm coming here into the back view or into the side view, and it's just adjusting the shape of the back of the skull. Now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and start creating a bit of that surface texture. Like if you look at the images, there's the reference image of the horn texture off a goat skull. You'll notice there's sort of a laminate quality where you get different layers of horn material laminated against each other and sort of layered, sandwiched together. So I want to get a similar kind of effect here. So I'm noticing right now, actually, before we move on to that, I've got a symmetry issue here on my model. So I've just masked one side and clicked Smart Resim. And what that does is it mirrors the masked side over and reintroduces your symmetry. So I just step up each subdivision level and keep clicking Smart Resim for each one, going all the way up to the top. Now you can see it's identical on both sides. Somehow I just worked with X symmetry turned off at some point and ended up losing my symmetrical form. You don't want to have the model symmetrical all the way to the very end. You definitely want to break symmetry at some point, especially here around the neck area and in the skin texture. But right now it's beneficial to have X symmetry turned on. So here I'm finding myself back down to the neck. It just caught my eye as I zoomed out. So I'm going to make some changes there. Just making very subtle changes to the flow of the clavicles and the sternomastoid when it meets the clavicle. Now going into the Alpha 1, using Alpha 1 on the clay tubes brush to give me this sort of fine tendon form here. And again, I'm just doing what I did earlier, where I just drag a stroke across that larger muscle form to give the feeling of there being skin draped across it. And you'll see that I'm doing a lot of the same techniques again, where I'm stepping down and smoothing to help knock back the shapes there in the neck to make them feel more subtle, and then just stroking across using the clay tubes brush again. So it's a matter of, for me, when I'm working, it's often a matter of just repeating a process, smoothing and repeating a process to build up what'll feel like a natural shape. Here I'm adjusting the width of the neck and just trying to find just the right width for that. It wasn't quite working for me yet. I'm using that clay tubes brush with no alpha again to come into the sternomastoid, or to the masseter muscle, filling out the area just adjacent to the masseter, and popping back up to the brow here and just sketching the brow and then along the length of the horn. And then using the move brush to bring that muzzle forward. Now at this stage we actually will get to detailing the horns. We took a very quick brush at it earlier, prematurely. But now we're ready to go ahead and start detailing it. And I'm readdressing those little holes, those little texture bits that I put in there. And then using the standard brush with alpha 1 just to sketch some striations along the horn. And this is just to make an initial, just passive texture. Just so I'm not working on a totally smooth surface, because these horns are going to be really rough. Just working my way around, making sure that I get a nice coverage of this texture around the whole horn. Now I'm masking out an area at the base of the horn. Inverting the mask, and then I'm going to take the move brush and I'm just going to pull that up and then pull it over to the right to overlap the masked area next to it. And this is going to be that laminating effect that I was talking about earlier, where you get these layers of horn material that sort of sandwich against each other. So it's like sheets of material stacked on top of each other, growing to make the horn. So really I'm just using the mask as a sculpting tool, pulling out and then tucking it over, and that gives me a nice deep undercut, a hard shadow, and a very realistic looking dark line there, so it feels like there's a lot of depth underneath that shelf. This is a great technique for doing things like exoskeletons on bugs or some types of armor. Just don't forget that you can use the mask as a sculpting tool. And remember that the mask pen that we're using here is accessed under the brush menu. It's a brush you actually select now. We talk about that in the text of the article, but just remember it's the mask pen brush. Just working my way down bit by bit. Masking and isolating an area with the mask, and then tugging it up and over. Now we're switching back to the clay tubes brush with alpha 1. Now I'm switching to the standard brush and using this wrinkle alpha. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a nice sort of distressed, gouged look to the horn. You can see I'm just dragging this alpha down the length of the horn, and it creates that nice weathered look that you associate with the with horns and antlers. No need to fuss with it too much. Just drag that stroke down the length of the horn. Make sure that you try and adjust the scale as you go down. You want the striations to get a little bit tighter and smaller. You don't want them to be the same size going all the way down the length of that horn. I'm switching to the standard brush with alpha 1 and then picking out shadow again in these areas, like the little holes that I've created there along the horn. And I'm moving over here into the actual face itself. I'm going to pick out a little bit of shadow area here coming into the brow. And it just helps create interest, just to catch shadow in some areas. It doesn't have to be anything too specific, it's just nice to catch a little bit of dark. It breaks up the values, just like you would in a drawing. You want your value range to break up and have some variety to it. Well, the same is true in the grayscale in your sculpture. You want it to have some variety. You want there to be highlight and shadow. Now here I'm using the move brush to break up the edges of these laminate pieces of horn here. And then switching to my clay tubes brush, this time with the alpha, and just brushing across the transitional space between the horn and the brow itself, or the top of the skull, I should say. This creature has a very nice kind of frontal eminence from which these horns are growing. It does seem to be some kind of regal crest or something he might use as a bashing tool. Now I'm just deepening the edges here. As you can see, I'm deepening those shelves underneath the bits of horn, and also adding some cracks in there, just using the standard brush with alpha 1. A very simple brush choice, and just trying to break up the texture and make it irregular and interesting. I'll point out something that I'm doing here that I shouldn't be doing, is I have my X symmetry turned on. And at this stage, I really should have that turned off, and I go in later on and break symmetry, but it's easier, I think, when you're texturing like this, when you're creating these sorts of little cracks and nooks and stuff, to go ahead and turn off your X symmetry. Things like that, that wrinkle texture that I put along the length of the horn, those striations that I put in, those you can do with symmetry turned on. But when you're adding little cracks and dents and things, bits of damage, it's best to do that asymmetrically. I'm going to actually pull spikes out of this frontal part of the horn here. Not quite yet, but it is. I am toying with the idea right now. Now I'm going back to that wrinkle brush. Masking out everything but the horn up in this area, and I'm adding some more kind of distressed striations. I want to really texture that horn in a specific way, so when it's butting up against the skin, it's pretty obvious what's skin and what's the horn. I'm taking that wrinkle alpha down into the neck area now, creating a nice crosshatch wrinkle texture through there. Letting it flow down between the collarbones. So it looks like the skin is sort of stretching and compressing there a lot, and so the wrinkles radiate out from that area. I'm just doing a bit of smoothing to knock back the tooth on those wrinkles. I don't want them to be quite so noisy, so I'll just knock them back with a little bit of smooth brush. And letting the wrinkles radiate out from the mouth here. So something important to keep in mind when you're sculpting wrinkles is that the skin will wrinkle in a direction opposite to the direction of the muscle striations underneath the skin. So if you're familiar with the muscle around the mouth that we mentioned earlier, the orbicularis oris, it's a circular muscle. The striations run in a circle around the mouth, so the major wrinkles are actually going to radiate out and transverse the striations of the mouth muscle.